And welcome again to this virtual solution session on the price of inaction, the economic costs of violence against women and girls, and what budgetary priorities can teach us. My name is Farida Bena, and I'm the Director of Diplomacy and UN Representative for Every Woman, which is a coalition of over 4,000 activists and organizations in 165 countries. We exclusively focus on ending violence against women and girls. It's an honor to see you join in for this event, which is one of the solution sessions held in the margins of the Second World Summit for Social Development in Doha, happening right now. I'm happy to see that representatives have joined from member states, from UN agencies, trade unions, civil society representatives, including some of our own coalition members. And I take this opportunity to express my deep appreciation for Women for Human Rights Nepal, which is one of our coalition members and also a co-host of this event. And is represented here today by our Executive Director, Upasana Rana. Let me briefly introduce you to the other panelists today. We have Madame Chantal Mulop, Special Advisor to the President of the Democratic Republic of Congo for Youth, Gender and Violence Against Women, and Human Trafficking. Bienvenue, Madame Chantal. We also have Ms. Heran Ayele, Technical Advisor for the UN Spotlight Initiative. Welcome, Heran. We will hear from Ms. Upasana Rana, Executive Director of Women for Human Rights Nepal, as I've just said, and from Ms. Paola Simonetti, Director of the Equality Department at the International Trade Union Confederation. So a warm welcome again to you all. As I said, we are holding this this virtual session in the margins of the Doha Summit. We are doing that for a very good reason, because as the global community gathers in Doha after 30 years to reaffirm shared commitments to human dignity, social justice, equality, we all know that many of these commitments are currently under threat due to the rapidly changing geopolitical landscape and the recent massive aid cuts around the world. Now, women's rights defenders are particularly under pressure from all sides. And this brings me to the reason why we're having this event today. Violence against women and girls is one of the most widespread human rights violations, if not the most widespread. And it's on the rise on multiple levels. What we're witnessing requires an urgent and holistic response, including at social and economic level. Now, historically, my organization, Every Woman, has advocated for stronger international law as an effective way to end violence against women and girls. And most notably, we have been calling forever for a new optional protocol to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, also known as CEDAW, or the Women's Bill of Rights. This advocacy very much remains at the core of what Every Woman does and what we believe in. At the same time, we recognize that the global landscape is changing fast in new and profound ways. And this demands that we rise to the urgency of the situation that too many women and girls are experiencing today. And so we are deliberately expanding our work to address gender-based violence, not only by calling for new legislation, but also by looking into existing legislation and whether it is being implemented or not. We want to maximize the use of laws that may be already in place in many countries, but for some reason do not turn into action or only turn into action in part. One of the arguments that we most frequently hear is that addressing violence against women and girls is costly. And many governments simply do not have enough resources to prioritize this issue on their agenda or their budget. I am here today to question this narrative and argue that, in fact, ending this violence is not only a moral imperative, a human rights priority, but is also an economic necessity. Indeed, inaction in the face of violence against women and girls carries a big price tag. Based on UN Women estimates, we know that this type of violence costs nations 4 to 5% of global GDP per year. The World Bank even goes further and says that in some countries it costs twice as much, at 3.7% of GDP in some countries. So compared to what we are paying, what the world is paying to end, in terms of violence against women and girls, we also know from UN Women and UNFPA data that we can solve this problem if we spend around $42 billion a year in ending violence against women and girls. So it seems like a lot of money, but $42 billion are really a fraction of what the world is paying every year in not prioritizing this scourge, really, this human rights violation. It's not just a question of saving money. Again, based on data from the UN, we know that when we invest $1 in gender equality, in women's economic empowerment, we get $8 in return. So it really makes sense on so many levels to end violence against women and girls. And we want to introduce a new perspective to this huge issue that the world faces. The question we must ask ourselves and our governments is not whether we can afford to act in response to violence against women and girls, but whether we can afford not to. This brings me to emphasize the importance of prioritizing budget resources to address this type of violence. National budgets are important. They tell us what governments and nations choose to prioritize, what they give importance to, and also what they are willing to overlook. So gender-responsive budgeting, especially in order to address violence against women and girls, is a key solution to end violence against women and girls, and it makes perfect sense also in social and economic terms. So I hope that with this event today, we will start or continue and foster a dialogue that examines the many impacts, the many dimensions of violence, looking at the social and economic impacts of this concerning trend, which is on the rise and which is affecting so much of our humanity and of people around the world. So without further ado, I would now like to conclude my opening remarks, and I hope that this discussion will also really give us new ideas and allow us to share best practices on what works when national budgets do integrate a gender-responsive approach to ending violence, gender-based violence, and violence against all women and girls. As you heard from my colleague Amjad, you can write your questions in the Q&A section of this Zoom call, and we will do our best to answer all of them. If we run out of time, I see there's already quite a lot of participants, we will get back to you in writing after the event. So I will now give the floor to Madame Chantal Mulop from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Madame Chantal is the Special Advisor to the President for Youth, Gender and Violence Against Women, and Human Trafficking. Madame Chantal, vous avez la parole.
Merci beaucoup et bonjour à tout le monde. Mesdames et messieurs, c'est pour moi un réel plaisir de prendre la parole au nom de la République démocratique du Congo et de son président, le chef d'État, son Excellence Monsieur Félix-Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo, dont la vision place la dignité humaine et l'égalité entre les sexes au cœur du développement national. Mon pays a traversé des épreuves de la guerre, de la pauvreté et de l'instabilité, mais il a aussi su se relever grâce au courage silencieux de ces femmes. Ce sont elles qui, au lendemain des crises, ont rebâti le foyer, relancé les marchés, réouvert les écoles et ravivé l'espérance. À travers leur résilience, elles ont incarné la reconstruction d'une nation tout entière. Aujourd'hui, c'est à cette force féminine que nous devons repenser notre modèle de développement social et économique. Mais la violence faite aux femmes et aux filles n'est pas seulement une atteinte grave aux droits humains. Elle représente également une véritable hémorragie économique mondiale. Selon l'estimation internationale, elle coûte chaque année plus de 1,5 milliard de dollars, soit près de 3,7% de produit intérieur brut mondial. Ces pertes dépassent parfois les dépenses globales consacrées à l'éducation primaire. En Europe, ce fléau engendre plus de 366 milliards d'euros de pertes annuelles. Et si en Afrique, les statistiques sont souvent incomplètes, ces effets sont visibles dans chaque foyer. À chaque fois qu'une femme blessée est empêchée de travailler, qu'une jeune fille interrompt sa scolarité ou qu'une famille s'effondre sous le poids de la violence, c'est une part de croissance qui s'efface. En République démocratique du Congo, la réalité est tout aussi préoccupante. Plus d'une femme sur trois âgée de 15 à 49 ans a subi des violences physiques ou sexuelles de la part d'un partenaire intime. Dans certaines zones de conflit, cette proportion atteint des sommets de 70% rien qu'en 2023. Et en 2023, plus de 25 000 survivants ont été pris en charge par Médecins sans frontières, soit en moyenne deux femmes chaque heure. Ces chiffres, pourtant effrayants, ne traduisent qu'une partie du drame. Ils ne comptabilisent ni le traumatisme psychologique, ni la perte de productivité, ni les coûts sociaux engendrés pour la, désagré- la désagrégation familiale et la précarité économique. Si l'on estime avec prudence que les violences basées sur le genre représentent au moins 1% du PNB national, alors la RDC perd chaque année plus de 600 millions de dollars. Ce montant équivaut à la reconstruction de certaines écoles, d'hôpitaux et de routes, ou la mise en œuvre de programmes de cohésion et de paix durable. L'inaction a donc un prix. Il est colossal, humain, économique et institutionnel. Conscient de cette réalité, le président de la République, chef de l'État, son Excellence M. Félix-Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo, a choisi de transformer la douleur en action publique. Sous son impulsion, la lutte contre les violences faites aux femmes et aux filles est devenue une priorité nationale et un pilier de gouvernance congolaise. Trois axes structurent cette réponse: le leadership politique, la justice réparatrice et la transformation culturelle. La création d'une coordination que je dirige, une coordination présidentielle spécialisée rattachée directement au chef de l'État, a permis d'assurer une redevabilité claire et un pilotage stratégique. À travers des institutions comme la SIAVA et le FONAREF, la RDC œuvre à inscrire durablement la réparation des survivants dans la politique nationale. Ce travail institutionnel s'accompagne d'une révolution culturelle portée notamment par la déclaration de Kinshasa sur la masculinité positive adoptée par le chef de l'État africain en 2021, qui invite les hommes à devenir des acteurs du changement plutôt que des spectateurs. Mais le silence a un coût. Ne rien faire, c'est accepter de payer 3 fois. D'abord en vie humaine, ensuite en perte économique, enfin en crédibilité politique. Dans l'est du pays, les violences ont désorganisé les zones minières et freiné la production. À Kinshasa, elles limitent l'essor, Kinshasa, la capitale de la RDC, elles limitent l'essor de l'entrepreneuriat féminin. Dans les villes, dans les villages, elles perpétuent la pauvreté, génération après génération. L'inaction n'est pas neutre. Elle détruit le tissu social et économique de la nation. Le budget d'un pays révèle toujours ses véritables priorités. Pourtant, moins de 1% de l'aide internationale consacrée à l'égalité de genre finance, finance concrètement la lutte contre les violences faites aux femmes. À ce jour, seuls 27 États dans le monde disposent d'une ligne budgétaire nationale spécifiquement dédiée à cette cause. En RDC, nous œuvrons à combler ce déficit en intégrant la budgétisation sensible au genre dans la planification nationale. Nous plaidons pour la création de fonds multisectoriels, pour la traçabilité des dépenses publiques et pour un suivi par indicateur de genre. Ce n'est pas une simple question d'équité. Chaque dollar investi dans la prévention des violences rapporte entre 5 et 20 dollars de bénéfices sociaux et économiques. C'est ce que j'appelle avoir avec conviction l'économie de la dignité. L'avenir que nous voulons exige du courage politique et moral. Il suppose d'inscrire dans les budgets nationaux une ligne claire pour éradiquer les violences faites aux femmes et aux filles, d'évaluer chaque année les progrès réalisés, de mobiliser le secteur privé autour de la responsabilité sociale et de renforcer la coopération sud-sud pour mutualiser les modèles efficaces. Ce combat n'est pas une dépense, c'est un investissement dans la stabilité, la paix et la croissance. Le chef de l'État, le chef de l'État, son Excellence Félix Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo, l'a dit avec justesse. Le développement de la RDC ne sera complet que lorsque chaque Congolaise sera libre, protégée et respectée. Cet engagement n'est pas symbolique, il est profondément politique et structurel. De Kinshasa à Doha, notre message reste le même. La justice de genre n'est pas un coût à supporter, mais un levier d'avenir à valoriser. La paix de l'inaction, lui, est tout simplement trop élevée pour être acceptée. Je vous remercie.
Merci à vous, Madame Chantal. Thank you so much for this intervention, which puts the focus and sheds a light on several levels. First of all, a way to end violence against women and girls requires a cultural revolution, as you rightly pointed out, promoting positive masculinity, but also very concretely, it requires resetting the economy and talking about an economics of dignity, of South-South cooperation, of specific budget allocations to ending violence against women and girls. So thank you for providing a principled and at the same time practical solution and way forward to address this concerning trend on the rise. I would like to give the floor to Ms. Heran Ayele, Technical Advisor of the UN Spotlight Initiative. Over to you, Heran, and welcome again.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me to this very timely session, given what's happening across the globe. It's more urgent than ever that we are able to discuss how we can prioritize ending violence against women and girls right now. So I've prepared a presentation just to give you a specific data points that really shows that violence against women and girls is a serious issue that needs to be prioritized. So just to introduce myself, I'm Heran. I'm the technical advisor with the Spotlight Initiative. Spotlight Initiative is the largest UN initiative on ending violence against women and girls. Next slide, please. So what I want to talk about today with you is just to briefly highlight what are the overall global costs. So we've heard both from Dr. Farida as well as Ms. Chantal, the specifics in DRC, but also more broadly. But I also want to unpack what that means at a macro, but also at a micro level, but also help us understand how budgets and financing can be used to prioritize ending violence against women and girls, and share some of the lessons and insights from Spotlight Initiative. Next, please. So before I start talking about the economics cost, maybe a bit of background around Spotlight, right? What is Spotlight Initiative? So Spotlight Initiative is, as I mentioned, was launched in 2017. It's the largest global effort on ending violence against women and girls. It was launched through a significant investment from the European Union of 500 million euros. It was implemented in more than 25 countries across 5 regions. It is a multi-agency initiative. It's anchored at the highest level within the UN. And what Spotlight really showed is that when you work on ending violence against women and girls, it accelerates progress across the SDGs. And hence, it's an SDG accelerator. So as a result, in 2023, given the impact it was making across countries, it was announced as a high impact initiative for the UN. It's also a UN demonstration fund. What that means is it's really trying to foster joint commitment, joint work across different UN agencies in service of countries, bringing their added value, resources, and expertise to build a more effective and more sustainable programs. But really what's crucial and central for the initiative is it takes a whole of society approach in each of the countries that it was implemented. It takes a whole of government approach. The GBV is really at the highest center, at the highest level within each of those countries, and particularly civil society is at the center. So what that means is it has pioneered a new way of working with communities, with civil society, with governments, ensuring that there is meaningful engagement. But civil society is also engaged in governance and in decision-making, in expanding civic space in all of the 25 countries it was implemented. It works across 4 areas: on prevention, on response, on laws and policies supported by stronger data, as well as strengthening the women's movement. So it has a comprehensive theory of change and brings the whole of society, whole of government approach to its model. So it's been in implementation for almost more than 6 years, and a lot of studies have been conducted. And what the studies are really showing us is that it's close to 70 to 90% much more effective when we have such a comprehensive, a holistic approach to the issue, as opposed to implementing single pillar or siloed initiatives on GBV. So I'm excited to be here to share some of our learnings specifically around this, but more related to the economic cost of violence. Next slide, please. All right, so how do we understand, violence against women and girls and how much it's costing us today? We know, and it's been said by all the panelists today, that violence continues or remains to be the most pervasive human rights violations to develop. It's a significant barrier to development. It's also costing significant cost to women, to their families, to communities, and to entire countries and states. And oftentimes, these costs are both direct and indirect, and tangible and intangible. So when we say direct, we're talking about the immediate, we're talking about the measurable expenses that is resulting from the acts of violence. Oftentimes, these are identifiable, quantifiable, as opposed to indirect costs, and these are mostly healthcare costs, legal justice system costs, social costs related to shelters and household costs. When we say indirect, we're talking about the long term, the less visible, but the much more substantial, and that affects not only the survivors and their families, but also the wider economy and the wider society. This includes lost productivity, reduced economic growth, intergenerational impact, but also the social and the economic costs. So it does have a significant impact in our society. So the numbers are quite staggering. The global estimates currently we have from the UN and the World Bank is that violence against women and girls can cost countries around at least 4% of the GDP, their GDP. And we also know that violence against children specifically even costs more. That the numbers are showing that 5% of GDP. So what we are saying when we say it's costing 4% of GDP, what we're truly saying is that the money lost due to violence equals 5% of the entire value of a country's economy, a huge loss. There are also regional snapshots that shows even regionally how this is impacting. The European Institute for Gender Equality conducted a study, an estimate that shows the cost of violence amounting to 289 billion a year. That is quite a significant number. And at country level, we're seeing that the data varies from one country to another, but again, the impact is significant as well. So for example, a recent study conducted in Zimbabwe showed that violence is costing Zimbabwe $2 billion annually, or 2% of their GDP, while violence is costing Jamaica a significant amount, close to 6.5% of their GDP. Next slide, please. But we do know that the true cost of violence is much, much higher and oftentimes very difficult to quantify. So we are estimating that it's above the percentage that I just referenced, because violence causes immense harm to survivors' health, to the well-being, to the security, autonomy of women and girls, of communities. Oftentimes it has lifelong consequences, including death in most cases. It has profound psychological harm. It causes stress, anxiety, depression, serious sexual and reproductive health problems, unwanted pregnancies that has intergenerational impact. So the long-term consequences are quite severe. So what that tells us is that, yes, we can quantify in some form the cost of violence, but we are not able to clearly show the true cost, and that it is much, much higher than what the numbers are telling us. So I think just for us to keep that in mind as we think of the solutions and how we want to prioritize on working on addressing ending violence against women and girls. Next slide, please. Different studies are also showing us how violence is very much interlinked and how it can be a barrier to the achievement of sustainable development goals. I think this really is very much linked to what I explained earlier as we talk about the indirect costs. So for example, just to give you specifics, research has shown that violence compromises the country's ability to achieve SDG 4, for example, quality education, because we know violence against women, against girls, create barriers to accessing and completing schools. So this limits the women's and girls' ability to lead a healthy, fulfilling, and economically independent life. We also know, for example, that violence impacts women and girls' sense of safety in public spaces. What that means is this then again impacts progress on SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities. Studies are also showing that violence will result in 30 to 40% loss of income, loss of 30% of annual wages due to absenteeism, due to reduced productivity and out-of-pocket costs. So what that means is we're not able to advance progress on SDG 8, which is looking at decent work and economic growth. So we know that ending violence is very important and it's necessary to advance inclusive and sustainable development across the globe. Next slide, please. So just again, another data point to show us that, so now moving on from the cost of violence to the cost of inaction, right? We know that addressing violence against women and girls thereby is important and very urgent. And we know that it requires resources. And we do know that the budgets do exist, the resources do exist. But the problem oftentimes is how we're spending it or how as countries we're prioritizing it. We know, at least from the big circle you see there, 2.7 trillion USD dollars is being spent on militarization today. That's a staggering number compared to just, as you can see, the very, very small pink dot over there compared to 458 million US dollars spent on efforts addressing ending violence against women and girls. So put it in another way, our global priorities are sadly very clear. Military spending is nearly 6,000 times higher than spending to end violence against women and girls. So this shows you that the money is there, but it's about how we're prioritizing within each of the countries. And according to a data point even highlighted at the beginning of this session, we know that ending violence against women and girls requires close to 42 billion for 132 priority countries by 2030. This might slightly be less than what is required, but at least we know that if a fraction of what was spent for military, it went towards peace, equality, and safety and addressing violence against women and girls, we are able to achieve sustainable development goals. So again, just showing you how it's all about how we prioritize and how we shift resources to the crucial areas that is needed urgently for us to advance as a nation. Next slide, please. So what did we learn to Spotlight? Is it possible? And from what we've seen, at least in Spotlight Initiative, there solutions are there, and it is possible. So that the way we've seen countries do that is when you have a comprehensive whole of government approach, whole of society approaches to end violence against women and girls, like that of Spotlight Initiative, it works. What that means is when there's a sustained political will, that is really, it is possible to invest in violence against women and girls. As I mentioned earlier, one of the core pillars of Spotlight Initiative is looking at strengthening national institutions and sectors and really helping governments to generate domestic public financing on ending violence against women and girls. But we do know that countries often, physical space is often constrained by aid conditionality, debts, trade barriers, weak monitoring of existing spending in particular. But despite that, there is a way to get ahead and really ensure domestic public financing. And the way we've done that primarily is through, first and foremost, strengthening gender responsive budgeting within each of those countries, promoting cross-sectoral coordination, elevating political champions at all levels of government, and really leveraging national action plans on GBV as an enabling framework for pushing for investment in those countries. And finally, but most importantly, strengthening women's rights organizations in their advocacy to push for accountability and more financing within each of those countries. When we've seen that when we did this across all the countries in Spotlight Initiative, at least in 4 of the countries there in the slide, Ecuador, Liberia, Trinidad, Tobago, and Uganda, this has been reliably tied to $50 million USD in those countries. So just to give you a bit of a nuanced example, for example, in Liberia, we've seen that especially during COVID-19, there was a significant rise of violence against women and girls. By working, the initiative really worked to help strengthen the Ministry of Finance gender responsive budgeting unit. And what that resulted is in the adoption of a national anti-SGBV roadmap for the country. And then that resulted in the government committing $2 million, for example, in Liberia for its implementation. And we also learned that the new administration has allocated additional investment in 2024 for this roadmap. So I think building capacities of government around gender responsive budgeting has shown to be successful. When we talk about enabling political champions, but also cross-ministerial violence against women and girls expertise, for example, in Uganda, the initiative helped strengthen district-level coordination and ownership, really helping to dispel the notion that violence is not solely the responsibility of the Ministry of Gender, but the responsibility of all sectors, but also the responsibility at all levels of government, and not just federal, but regional and really at the local level. What that has done is really unlocked even local resources within at least 5 local governments in Uganda for the GBV response. In Trinidad and Tobago, we've seen when you have a national strategic plan on GBV that helped unlock significant resources as well. Next slide, please. I'm almost wrapping up. So all these examples are telling us that not only is it possible, ending violence against women and girls is cost-effective, it fuels economic growth, and it accelerates sustainable development. Studies are showing how this is very much tied to accelerating progress across all the other SDGs that I've flagged. Just to give a specific example, we know at least through the Spotlight Initiative, when you invest in ending violence against women and girls, 5 million more girls stay in school. When we invest in GBV, we are protecting survivors from losing 30% of their annual wage. We're restoring 43 productive working days every year, and so forth. We're driving climate action. So we know that it's the pathway to sustainable and inclusive development. Last slide, please. So just to conclude, last slide. Ending violence against women and girls is both an extremely urgent human rights imperative, but is essential to inclusive economic and development. As we've heard, it's a major economic drain, but the evidence is clear. Comprehensive investments pay off, and governments must match political commitments with comprehensive financing. The challenge is not scarcity, but the challenge is about priorities. We do have the proven tools and approaches. And if we do engage government with support from civil society, we can help strengthen accountability and really ensure investment on addressing violence against women and girls. I'm happy to share our key tools and resources, but that's it from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heran, for this very informative presentation and really all the data points that you have provided, which are so useful. We do need more data, more evidence, and for sure the Spotlight Initiative is making an important contribution to filling the data gap. I was particularly impressed by your reflections on the invisible and indirect costs of violence against women and girls. So even the budget estimates that we have come up with are underestimate the actual costs of this massive human rights violation. I also appreciated the fact that you pointed out that the money is there. There is enough funding resolving or at least adequately addressing violence against women and girls would cost a fraction of what is spent on for the military, for military expenditures. And so it's really not an issue of resources, it's an issue of prioritizing what matters and what could generate also higher productivity for women and girls themselves, their families, their communities, and their society. Um, so we're moving now to Upasana Rana, the Executive Director of Women for Human Rights Nepal, and also the co-host of this event. Thank you so much, Upasana, and over to you. Please, with a plea to keep this presentation to the 7 minutes if you can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farida. Thank you for inviting me to share my perspective. Dear colleagues and fellow advocates, as we have heard from the moderator and the previous speakers, the global cost of violence against women and girls is staggering. But beyond those figures and
Sorry,
data,
Upasana, can I just ask you to please raise your voice a bit, if you don't mind speaking up?
can you hear me now?
Yes, a bit louder, please. Thank you.
Is it better now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So in my remark, I want to focus on what predictable and gender responsive budget actually mean on the ground. So how they change lives, build trust in institution, and transfer prevention from a policy aspiration into lived reality. So in Nepal, like in many other countries, violence against women and girls is not a seasonal crisis, it is a structural one. Yet our response have often been fragmented and temporary. So funding comes and goes, and with it, the services at the community disappear. So, so I want to focus like why predictable and gender responsive budget can change this narrative. So first, if we have a gender response budgeting, so it makes the service permanent, like shelters, counselors, and legal aid, which cannot depend on 1 year grant or the project. So predictable budget allow local government and women's group to plan ahead, train the staff at the community, and ensure support every single day of the year. So second is they make prevention possible. So the norms do not change in 6 months. So it requires a continuous effort and investment in awareness, education, and community engagement. So third, so it makes accountability visible. A dedicated budget line to end violence against women and girls can turn political will into measurable action. So without a budget, so policies remain just a promise, and promises alone cannot end violence against women and girls. So I would like to focus on my experience from my organization, Women for Human Rights. So we work across all 77 districts of Nepal with over 100,000 single women members. And our work shows that predictable financing has a ripple effect far beyond the budget itself. So, in my experience, the first lesson that I learned is local women's group are the first and last responders. Let's say if something happens like earthquake, COVID, or times of conflict, it was always the women's collective who opened the safe houses, fed the family, and counseled the survivors, often with no formal resources. So when local government began allocating small but steady budget, those same group became a recognized partner in service delivery. So lesson two is predictable budget ensure the continuity. Where local government have allocated consistent GVV budget, safe houses can operate 24/7. The counselors, paralegal stay long enough to build survivor trust. So police unit coordinate directly with women's organization, improving reporting and reducing the survivor trauma. And lesson three is economic empowerment is prevention. So we always get asked, like, when you want to work with the survivors, why are you want to do the economic empowerment? But when women access livelihood support, micro grant, and childcare, they rebuild confidence and autonomy. So predictable funding for economic recovery is the best violence prevention tool we have. Now, let me share one survivor story. We worked in one of the most rural part of Nepal, and there was a widow young widow who was enduring years of abuse from a relative after her husband's death. And when we went there with a project, she found help and a safe space with us. So after a 1 year long connection with her, we have built a trust. She rebuilt the confidence, and we have a safe space. But unfortunately, that project ended, and suddenly she has nowhere to go. That safe space she had for a year was stopped. But something good happened. With that 1 year project, we built a very good relation with the local government there. And we convinced the government to introduce a dedicated local GVV budget line to reopen the same safe space for the community women group. So even the project exited, now the local government is running that safe space with a partnership with our women's group. So that now that young widow, she found the protection and a safe space again. So the difference between despair and dignity was just one predictable budget line. But despite progresses, the gaps remained stark. The budgets are still fragmented across ministries, especially in Nepal. Like each ministry, the coordination between each ministry, the tire of the government is very weak, and with all those confusion and weak coordination, the budget still gets very fragmented. And many budget is still a one-time allocation or symbolic budgeting is still being done. And prevention, the most cost-effective investment, still remains very underfunded. So until gender-responsive budgeting becomes a core national commitment, not a donor-driven project, we will continue to pay the hidden cost of the inaction. So at the end, so I want to give the 5-point suggestion to the government and the partners, like to create a clear national and local budget line for ending violence against women, institutionalize gender responsive public finance, like track who benefits, not just what is being spent, fund local women's organization directly, not as a beneficiary or a subcontractor, but as a long-term partner. Invest equally in prevention and response, both save lives and reduce long-term cost, and build a pooled funding connecting police, health services, social welfare, so that survivors experience coordinated support. So this is not just a spending more, it is about spending smarter and with keeping the survivor at the center. So violence against women and girls is not inevitable, but it is preventable. But prevention requires investment, the predictable, gender responsive, and locally owned budgets. So at the end, ending violence is not a cost, it is one of the smartest and most moral investment any government can make. And financing women's safety is financing the overall development of the country. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pasana. And thank you also for staying within the time allocated for your presentation. I particularly enjoyed your touching upon the quality of the funding. So it's not just a question of allocating specific and adequate resources to addressing violence against women and girls. It's also making sure that this funding is not fragmented, is not allocated across many different departments of line ministries without proper coordination. This is a key issue in terms of making sure that the funding allocated is as effective as it can be. So absolutely on point. Another thing that I really appreciated about your presentation is the accent, the emphasis you put on prevention. The most cost-effective tool to end violence against women and girls, and yet one of the least funded. And this is an issue that comes up regularly also in dealing with other issues. It's so much harder to secure funding for something that hasn't happened yet. And at the same time, we do know that prevention can really make a huge difference in how violence against women and girls is addressed. So thank you very much for your intervention. And now we are moving on to our last panelist who has just joined me from her own session, side event here in Doha. And so we will share the screen because she's sitting right next to me. It's Ms. Paola Simonetti, who is the Director of the Equality Department at the International Trade Union Confederation. So Paola, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Farida. Thanks for giving this opportunity to the International Trade Union Confederation to speak at this important event and to contribute to the conversation. For those who are not familiar, the International Trade Union Confederation is the global umbrella representing the voice of workers globally. We are a membership-based organization, and we have members in 169 countries, and we represent 191 million workers around the world. Gender-based violence and harassment in the world of work is, of course, a top priority for our organization. For us, of course, the main point of reference is the Convention C190 and its recommendation 206, which are the main legal pieces that are indeed our point of reference when it comes to legislation, but also when it comes to workplace policies. So the International Organization Convention C190 was a convention indeed that was negotiated within the International Labour Organization that, as you know, it's a tripartite organization with including governments and social partners, therefore workers and employers representatives. So it's a convention that of course needs to be ratified by governments, and then of course it needs to be implemented. We are at the moment at the rate of 52 countries that have ratified C190 convention, but of course we must accelerate not only ratification, as I said before, but very much the implementation. So for the C190 is indeed a global blueprint for everyone, not only for the trade unions or the employers or the government, but really for everyone to guide our action and engagement in order to prevent gender-based violence and harassment, to protect the victims of gender-based violence and harassment, and to provide also support to and provide remedies to survivors and to the victim of those hideous issue. And also it is important to underline that the C190 goes beyond the physical workplaces, but also can cover for example, the digital spheres as well. And then it's not only limited to the workplace physically, but also covers other places that are related to work, but not necessarily the workplace. So the violence and the harassment, it's unfortunately, as many has said before me, a pervasive issue across sectors and workplaces. 1 in 5 workers worldwide reports violence or harassment at work. And we all know that women are, unfortunately face significantly higher risk and are more exposed to that. Not to mention the intersectional impacts on that, because of course, if we think civil situation is even worse for women of color, for example, for migrant women, LGBTQI plus workers, and then, also disability. So it's important to underline and to understand that the global gender-based violence and harassment, it's really rooted in power imbalances. And therefore, it's really important to tackle that also from an anti-discrimination lenses, but also to link it up to the safety and health at work. So it's indeed the convention souls, if I may speak like that, as really related to these important areas: non-discrimination and also occupational health and safety at work. But when it comes to the costs, right, of inaction, and in that sense, we cannot afford not to act on that. It's indeed, on both sides, if we look at both at the workers, but also if we look at the employers. And therefore, of course, the impact on the side of workers are, for example, harassment leads to stress, to depression, to safety issues, as I said, but also absenteeism. And also, at the end, the worker tends to, there is a high risk that the workers exit the employment. And then for the employers as well, this means productivity reduction, like a very intensive increase of turnover of employees, raise of health and litigation costs, and also this means indeed hundreds of millions of job lost. So on our estimation, we have we says that country lose between 1 or 3.5% of GDP due to violence and harassment. So this is, of course, first and foremost, a rights issue for us, but that has a direct impact also and undermines directly the inclusive growth in that sense. So when governments and employers fail to act, there is, a direct negative impact on, increased burden to the public health system, for example, to the social protection system, because these people do not have a job anymore, and, also on the justice structure, and most importantly, of course, as I said, on the victim of gender-based violence and harassment in the first place. So what are we doing about it? And then I'll try to be as concise as I can. Let me give a little bit of numbers. So according to, again, our latest survey, nearly half of all unions, and we had a survey including 114 national confederation at national level in more than 80 countries. So nearly half of the unions are engaged in negotiating workplace policies and collective bargaining agreements. And over 1/3 are engaged in discussion with employers to address gender-based violence and harassment. So this means that the action of the trade unions all over the world is indeed to, as I said, first of all, to campaign and to try to put, advocacy and social dialogue with governments for the ratification of the C-190, but then of course its provision need to be translated in the national legislation, and this is easier to be said than to be done. Then you have the second level of the action that we can put in place, and this is what I was mentioning the figures about. So the negotiations at workplace level through collective bargaining. And then also we are trying also to support the victims. Many examples of collective agreements at workplace include the setting up of reporting mechanism, of safe channels, of safe space for the victims that are accessible for them, you know, to report abuses. And then of course also when trade unions, gender-based violence and harassment is also an excellent tool also used by trade unions to organize workers at the workplace. We also try to put gender-based violence and harassment at the center of global agreements. So we had, for example, recently global brands signing up global agreements with trade unions at international level, putting the gender-based violence and harassment at the center, so to secure that the supply chains is also, safe in that respect. And then something that we are also doing in a way of preventing, but also, in trying to raise the profile of the relevance of this issue, supporting women in leadership within our movement as well. So in a nutshell, and I'll stop here because I know that time is not on our side. I would say that, for us, organizing and collective bargaining and social dialogue are, of course, the most powerful tool to have, democratic and inclusive workplaces, and therefore, preventing and then addressing gender-based violence and harassment when this occurs. And then, of course, the policy needs to be and go hand in hand with the funding, because if we don't have funding, we have, a limp approach. So, of course, we need to finance prevention. We need to invest in work-centered reporting system, survivor services, gender-responsive labor inspectorates, for example, and then also, we need to foster like a fully respectful workplace culture in that respect. And I must say that I was in a earlier debate also within the G20 context on a conversation on the positive masculinity, for example. So it's important that we have also men stepping up, also doing peer-to-peer, guiding and raising good examples, especially overall, but especially in a way of preventing the gender episodes of the gender-based violence and harassment at the workplace. But I'll stop here, and thanks a lot again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Paola. Amazing intervention, like the interventions from all other panelists. I think we're really getting into some very important substantive discussion points. I particularly appreciated your emphasizing that gender-based violence, harassment, violence against women and girls. I know there's a hot debate on the terminology in the Q&A. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But, it is in very closely related to power imbalances in the workplace. And we shouldn't forget that this dimension plays a big role in what's happening to women at work and in very closely related spaces. I also appreciated your mentioning the importance of having a legally binding instrument such as Convention 190 to help us curb this trend, if not eliminate it. And this is also what every woman historically has done by really calling for stronger international law, and specifically calling for an optional protocol to CEDAW, and also recommending the full implementation of CEDAW. And I also liked your final point about the role of positive masculinity, peer-to-peer support, which brings me back to our first intervention by Madame Chantal in the DRC. And here I would like to have a brief exchange with our speakers. And going back to you, Madame Chantal, exactly, I mean, if you want to comment on this point on the positive masculinity, but also looking at the gender responsive budgeting and budget lines specifically dedicated to ending violence against women and girls. I would be curious to know what accountability mechanisms the DRC and other governments can put in place or have already put in place to ensure that this funding, which is by nature addressing a cross-cutting, pervasive issue, is allocated in a transparent, predictable, and accountable way. Over to you.
Merci beaucoup, Farida. Moi, je pense, sincèrement, il faudrait mettre en place des systèmes qui vont être à la fois prévisibles et traçables. Et pour cela, comme j'avais dit un peu dans mon discours, si on entend bien, je parlais à peu près de 6 leviers qui sont inscrire, ce qui est important vraiment, c'est d'inscrire une ligne budgétaire nationale permanente, quelque part, qui est dédiée seulement à la cause de la femme, et qui doit être dans la loi. On doit le retrouver aussi dans la loi financière. Et cela va permettre de garantir la continuité des financements. Au lieu de toujours demander de l'argent pour une activité, parfois il y a pas. Et je pense que le problème est mondial. Il faut absolument qu'il y ait une ligne budgétaire. Comme on l'avait dit, il y a à peu près seulement 27 États qui l'ont. Nous, en RDC, on ne l'a pas vraiment. Il faudra qu'on puisse l'implémenter. Et puis mettre en place un mécanisme de suivi interinstitutionnel. C'est-à-dire, il faut avoir comme un comité. Dans les conseils des ministres, ils ont des comités comme ça qui existent, mais on doit l'avoir en dehors du conseil de ministres. C'est-à-dire, on doit avoir un comité interinstitutionnel avec le ministère du Budget, des Finances, du genre, de santé, de la justice, peut-être même des droits humains, chargés de contrôler. Et leur job, c'est vraiment de contrôler et de publier les dépenses. Comme ça, il y a un suivi qu'on regarde. Il faudra digitaliser, parce que, bon, nous, en RDC, on a une administration qui est assez lourde. Beaucoup de choses sont sur papier, mais il faudra absolument digitaliser la gestion budgétaire avec un tableau de bord accessible permettant de suivre les allocutions et les dépenses en temps réel. Quand ça va actif, passif, on peut le suivre facilement. Et puis, il faudra associer chaque financement à des indicateurs mesurables qui sont centrés, ouverts, qui sont ouverts pour, par exemple, pour les survivants, la prise en charge des survivants, les formations, les activités qui sont réelles. Et créer un fonds commun, c'est-à-dire un fonds commun entre l'État et les bailleurs de fonds, un fonds commun entre l'État et les partenaires pour centraliser et coordonner les acquis financiers avec un audit aussi indépendant. Il faudra vraiment faire le contrôle doit être accessible et être efficace. Et enfin, instaurer des mécanismes de redevabilité et de sanctions, surtout de sanctions, en cas de non-respect ou de détournement de fonds. Il faut avoir absolument un contrôle. Ça doit être on doit être absolument transparent dans ce processus. Et cela va permettre d'instaurer un système budgétaire extrêmement stable et tout cela dans la bonne transparence de tout le monde, quoi. En tout cas, c'est ce que moi, je pense qu'on devrait mettre en place.
Merci, Madame Chantal. Really, these are very practical recommendations. I mean, talking about creating an inter-ministerial committee, putting in place indicators, putting in place a pooled fund or a common fund, having an independent audit, anything that can not only ensure the transparency of these mechanisms, but also the possibility of imposing sanctions in case rules and regulations about gender responsive budgeting to address violence against women and girls are not respected. So thank you very much for that. Now, moving on to Heran, we heard from Chantal and from other speakers as well that, as much as we try to quantify and estimate the cost of violence, we really don't have a lot of information about specific budget lines. I mean, Chantal mentioned a couple of times that we can only trace specific budget lines to end violence against women and girls in 27 countries. Can you help us understand why we have this data gap?
Great. Thank you, Dr. Farida. Absolutely right. I think in my presentation, I mentioned one of the significant challenge we have is monitoring the budget lines. And not only the budget line, not only the allocation, but also even the actual spending of it, right? Yes, governments do allocate resources in some form on GBV, but even monitoring how that then is being utilized, how it's spent is a significant data gap. So obviously, this is quite a complex issue in terms of, setting up a system across countries that allows us to track specifically gender investments in GBV, in violence against women and girls, because again, it's all related to the strength in data systems in each of those countries. So when you have a country that has a stronger administrative data system or budgeting system, it might be easier to track budget lines on specific topics or issues. And oftentimes what we have also seen, at least in some of the countries where Spotlight was implemented, some of these issues are quite categorized in different ways as well. It's an issue of how they're being categorized. In some countries, these are treated as a social protection issue. So it's really, again, hard to pinpoint specifically if this is on gender-based violence, if it's on child protection. It's quite convoluted in that way. So it's really hard for us to understand. So it's also about the matter of how it's being categorized in the budgeting system of countries. But it's also about the lack of a stronger tracking and data system in each of these countries. So if you don't have a robust data system that really allows a stronger budgeting allocation with a clear standards for how it's being categorized, then it's really impossible to track how much is being allocated and how much is being spent. So it's really about the understanding of the issue itself in terms of how it's being categorized. It's about the system being in place, not only at the national level, but even locally within districts as well, and how it's all interconnected. So it's quite a number of factors that are contributing to this lack of data around allocation and spending.
Thank you, Heran. And you raise a very important point that sometimes the devil is in the detail. So you may have some funding allocated to this issue, but it is labeled in different ways. And it's hard then to find alignment across countries and to come up with a global figure. So this is a major challenge also for statisticians and the technical experts, very much so. Thank you. Now moving on to Upasana. Upasana, I was really struck by your emphasis, as I said earlier, on the need to work on prevention and that it is a very cost-effective tool to end violence against women and girls. So I wonder if you want to elaborate on that and maybe share your experience in Nepal trying to advocate for something that is not visible by nature, by default, and yet successful advocacy on prevention could really make a huge difference. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. Uh, though like it's very difficult how to, like really track the progress, because we've been working on prevention for so long, but yet violence against women and girl is still so rampant. But having said that, Nepal has one of the very strong legal provisions are there against violence against women. Nepal is among very few countries that recognizes marital rape, and that is there. But again, its implementation status, the access of the survivors to those provision is very debatable. So what we do is, we do, even with the Every Woman Treaty, we've done a lot of preventive education classes to the adolescents, because it is difficult to, aware the elder generation, but to aware the younger generation is what is the need of the time. So we work very closely with the youth, especially the adolescents, and we do a lot of legal awareness classes. We do a preventive education classes, and even we have a self-help group at the community level, and self-help group, those are organized within the community, and they mobilize themselves, so that the grassroots community have those information that are there is placed. And at the central level as well, so we do a lot of advocacy with the central government. So our government has an allocated GVB fund. So it's a fund allocated for, so there's a debatable question, like, is it a GVV or the violence against women and girl? But in the official term used is the GVB fund. So it is there. But like, how many of the survivors know about that fund? Again, that's a separate question. So we do a lot of, information sharing sessions at the community level through our self-help groups at the community level. It is there, but yeah, it's easier to say than to work at the grassroots, especially in the remote context of Nepal, uh, where like even the local government, they don't know that there is a GVB fund available. So it's a continuous work. It's like we need to continuously work with the central government. We need to continuously work with the local government, with the grassroots, and with the different group, youth group, the men engagement, because men is one of the actor of violence against women. So without working with them, is again, it's not possible to prevent those violence. So there are many things that can be done, that is being done. But again, having said that, it is still not what we, dream to achieve.
Thank you, Pasana. This is it's great to hear that you're already carrying out awareness raising activities at community level, and that you're embarking on prevention education classes, although the funding for those activities is more challenging than raising funding for response measures. So all the more we appreciate what Women for Human Rights Nepal is doing. Now moving on to Paula, right next to me. Paula, you talked about sharing best practices, and I wonder if you can tell us very concretely, how can we make violence against women and girls more visible vis-a-vis governments and employers? Because clearly what's coming up from this discussion is that it is not really a question of money. It's a question of giving the right priority to the emergency situation that so many women and girls, too many, are witnessing and living day in, day out. So how do we do that based on lessons learned from the International Trade Union Confederation?
Thank you, Farida. Yes, indeed. I would join also the other speaker in saying that, of course, it's also very important to provide evidence and to provide analysis and to provide data. And the SDGs enshrine the gender-based violence in their own targets, but unfortunately, there are no data, provided by countries. So it's a question also of which means that, providing data and monitoring, it's not a technical issue, is a political one. And therefore, we need really to push for an organic monitoring based on availability of data in that respect. But having said that, surely, from our point of view, we cannot stop there. We need really to put in place actions in order to ensure both prevention, but also to address and redress gender-based violence and harassment at the workplace. And for us, of course, freedom of association, collective bargaining are the tools to go about it, together with ensuring a gender-responsive labor market institutions, for example, the labor inspectorate that need adequately financing also in that respect. So just a couple of examples in order to to give a sense on what we are doing as trade unions. In my country, for example, in Italy, trade unions have reached provision for leave and support for survivors of domestic violence, for example. And now these agreements have successfully increased paid leave from 3 months to 6 months, as provided by law. So, I mean, we really, the trade unions were really able to, to shift the needle on the legislation point of view. In Canada as well, they won an amendment to the Occupational Safety and Health law, and now they have, the obligation, employers have the obligation to prevent violence and harassment, including domestic violence, and to conduct risk assessments. And this put, concrete obligations on the employers in terms of preventions. And then another example in Turkey, where despite the fact that it's the C-190 is not yet ratified, but still they managed, the trade unions there managed to put together a national social dialogue platform, where now 20 employers with collective agreements have adopted a zero tolerance policies to extend the C-190 aligned provisions throughout unionized workplaces in the textile sector. So I'm trying to give these 3 examples to give the narrative a little bit on how our engagement at the various level is organized. Thanks.
Thank you, Paula. Amazing work. And we do really have to learn a lot from your social dialogue model, which really can be used to address issues in the workplace. And I would say also on so many other dimensions that we face as women and girls. We are behind the schedule. It's not a surprise, but it's also a sign that the discussion is lively, included in the Q&A. I see lots of questions, and our colleague Zainab has answered all of them. I know some are fairly specific. There are people online who would like to know exactly how governments and local authorities are responding to incidents of violence against women and girls in refugee camps. And for that, we will reply by email, but just to be clear, every woman, the organization I represent, does not run operational programs, does not run operations. So we will get back to you if other panelists want to take this question that I see about how to address incidents in refugee camps, they're more than welcome. There are other questions related to the language we are using, and some participants feel we should only be talking about violence against women and girls as opposed to gender-based violence. I know there's a lot of talk and debate about this issue. It is sensitive for many people. I am very happy to see that we have online a member of the CEDA committee who has just written in the Q&A that the CEDA committee is drafting a general recommendation to CEDA on gender stereotypes. So that will for sure clarify many of the terms that we have been using. And just in general here, this event is focused on the economics of violence and how we can eliminate it and reduce the cost while also making the benefits, the dividends of ending violence more visible. So perhaps we should be thinking about organizing a specific event on the language. But for now, we're really looking forward to seeing this general recommendation from the CEDA committee at some point in the future. I also saw a question about estimating the cost of technology facilitated violence. Again, a huge issue on the rise, and a concerning trend that is really reaching astronomical levels. We are also very worried about this at Every Woman. And by the way, we will be organizing a side event to mark the 16 days of activism on gender-based violence on December, the 4th of December in Geneva. So it will be a specific side event, a hybrid side event. You will be able to attend this. And on the cost of prosecuting violence, perpetrators of violence, I wonder if perhaps, Heran, you have some data or information in terms of how we can estimate these costs. Again, very difficult to quantify them, but it is true that violence against women and girls also bears huge costs to the legal system in the countries where we do have some data. So perhaps would you like to take this question, and you basically have 1 minute.
Great, yes. No, as you rightly said, there is no precise figure that isolates only the cost of prosecution of violence against women and girls, but some research do offer useful benchmarks to quantify how much that costs. For example, the study I referenced that looked at the cost of violence in the European Union, which showed, I think, 366 billion per year. That number is tied, out of that, 21% were costs related to the criminal justice system. So meaning costs related to police, to the courts, to the prosecution and prison as well. So again, just to give you one data point, at least within the European Union, how much it's costing the criminal justice system when addressing violence against women and girls.
Thank you so much, Heran, and thank you also for keeping your answer concise. We are at time. I wonder if we can have a 30-second concluding remarks from each panelist. I will shut up. I have already spoken enough, but Madame Chantal, would you have a 30-second concluding remark to make, please?
Sorry. Je vais tout simplement dire que il faut absolument qu'il y ait des budgets institutionnels et que ça doit être traçable facilement et transparent. C'est tout ce que je peux dire absolument, parce qu'il n'y a pas vraiment de ligne budgétaire dans plusieurs pays concernant les cas des femmes, la violence faite à la femme, la violence sexuelle en zone de conflit. Il faut absolument qu'il y ait des lignes budgétaires dans les différents pays. Si on a seulement 27, alors on est plus de 193 pays au monde. C'est plus de 100 pays qui n'ont pas cela. Alors, c'est ça que je te veux dire. Merci.
Merci, Madame. Absolutely. Now over to Heran. Anything to add in 30 seconds or less?
Yes. Yes, just a sentence, ending violence is cost effective. It fuels economic growth, and it's really the pathway to sustainable and inclusive development. Yeah, I want to end with that. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Heran. Upasana, over to you.
I don't have much, but just want to emphasize that, having the predictable and gender responsive budget is very important because, when we empower women, we strengthen the entire economy. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So beautifully said. Paula.
Yes, 30-second piece from my side as well. So gender-based violence and harassment, addressing it, it's not an option. It's a core value and a core. It's at the heart of decent work and gender equality. And since we are here in Doha, it's also, I think, important to see that the link between social justice and democracy and gender equality together with fighting gender-based violence and harassment is at the core of social justice and democracy. So
Absolutely. Absolutely, Paula. Well, thank you so much to all the participants. I see that we still have 81 participants online who have very bravely gone through this 90 minutes of intensive discussion on the issue of costing and costing the end of violence against women and girls. So thank you for joining us. Every woman will continue to look into this huge issue with our eyes open and also with the strong belief that ending violence against women and girls makes perfect sense on all levels, for women and girls themselves, for their families, their communities, their economies, and for global prosperity. So thank you again, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.